Welcome back. You have apparently completed your lesson over adaptations. So we're going to move on now to see how adaptations help organisms to survive and reproduce, and then what's going to be the consequence of these adaptations building up and building up and building up over time, and how does that affect the future of a species. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at something called the process of evolution through natural selection. So we're going to look a lot today about survival of the fittest. We're going to talk about Charles Darwin and how he developed his theory of natural selection and how that changed how we look at how organisms change over time. So we're going to go ahead and jump into our notes here. And I'm going to share my screen. I did that last time. I promise I will get good at this eventually. Okay. Yes. Close. All right. So the theory of natural selection. Once again, the theory of natural, you gotta love technical difficulties even on Zoom. All right, so here we go. The theory of natural selection. So the idea of natural selection is that it's this natural process that occurs when organisms, be it plant, animal, bacteria, mushrooms, anything like that, any living organism is going to be better adapted for their environment. And because they're better adapted, they get to live longer and survive. And what happens when they survive? What do they get to do? They get to reproduce. Told you guys this was going to come back time and time again. Every time we talk about this, we're looking at survival. Because you're better adapted for your environment, because you survive, you get to reproduce and you get to hopefully pass on your good stuff to your offspring. So the idea of natural selection says that those organisms that have a better chance at reproducing, or those that survive, sorry, those organisms that survive are going to have a better chance at reproducing and passing on their beneficial traits. Now, one thing we have to remember here, it's not always the beneficial traits get passed on, okay? There are mutations, remember, that pop up in a species. Some of those mutations are harmful. Some of them are beneficial. There are times that the harmful mutations do get passed on. And those mutations, remember, are going to decrease the organism's chance at survival. There could be a chance that you don't pass on any of your beneficial traits. But because there are more organisms that have those beneficial traits, there is more of a chance that those traits will get passed on, okay? So if we look at our picture right here, this is where the idea of evolution first came in. This was proposed by a scientist from France named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. And his idea of evolution said that organisms gain adaptations during their specific lifetime, okay? So in this case, it would say that maybe this giraffe right here was too short, okay? And a couple of years later, he stretches his neck and he stretches his neck. He sees those leaves up there and he wants them so bad. So he's stretching his neck and he still can't get it. And as he gets older, he keeps on stretching his neck and he keeps trying to reach those big leaves. And he eventually, guess what he gets to do? He gets to reach the big leaves. And Lamarck's idea was, because this giraffe right here stretched and stretched and stretched, and he believed he could, he got taller, his neck got longer, and he passed those traits on to his offspring so that all of his offspring would have long necks. Now, we know this is not the way it works, okay? We know that this giraffe right here is, oh, sorry, I'm going to get up my little annotation. See, so this dude right here, he's too short, okay? He's hit his growth. He's not going to get any taller. And if he can't reach these leaves up here, what's he going to do? He's going to die. He's going to starve to death, okay? Because if all the trees around him are at this height and he can't reach those leaves, he's going to die and he doesn't get to reproduce, okay? Maybe he did, okay? Maybe some of his giraffes babies have short necks, okay? This guy right here, still, he's not tall enough to reach those leaves, so he's going to starve and he's going to die off. This dude right here, because he can reach the leaves, okay, he's going to have better health. He's going to live longer. He's going to get to reproduce more. And hopefully some of his little giraffe babies will inherit his long neck that he was born with. This is the important thing, is these organisms have to be born with this trait because they cannot develop it in their lifespan. This is where the idea of genetics comes in, okay? The mutations in your genes. So maybe at some point his great 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 grandpa had a mutation in his DNA that made his neck just a little bit longer. Okay. And then because of that, he was able to pass it on. And maybe a couple generations down, so there's another mutation that makes the neck just a little bit longer. And because it helps him to survive longer, that trait gets passed on. So it's this buildup of traits over a long period of time. We don't see it in individuals. We see it in populations. All right, so let's clear this, close this out. No, I said to clear it. There, my drawings, close it out. Okay, now we're good. All right. So what can natural selection not do? Okay, it doesn't give organisms what they want. Okay, it doesn't necessarily even give them what they need. All of this is completely by luck, by chance, by random mutations over thousands and millions of years. Okay, so this little beaver right here, he's thinking, okay, how am I going to get these trees cut down faster? Well, he wants a chainsaw because a chainsaw is just going to go ripping through those trees like none other. It doesn't work that way. Okay, it does not grant organisms what they need. Okay, we can't just randomly start growing chainsaws out of our hands and go whipping through the forest again. Okay, remember, everything is random. Everything is by mutations, building up over time. So here we have Lamarck again. And what does Lamarck say? Well, he says that right here, the first little giraffe, this is our short-necked ancestor. And they keep stretching and trying to reach the leaves, and they keep stretching. And then finally the neck becomes progressively longer and he can reach the happy leaves at the top. And so all of his little giraffe babies will have long necks. Lamarck had good intentions, but unfortunately he was incorrect. So the idea of natural selection is driven by adaptations. We've spent all this time on adaptations. Okay, remember, and adaptations are inherited physical traits, which could be structural, behavioral, or physiological, that help an organism to, again, survive and reproduce in its environment. So let's look at natural selection in action. We have, this is going to be a population of bugs. Okay, so our bugs start out this grayish purple color. And after a few generations, a couple mutations pop up. We have white bugs now, and we have pink bugs. So we got to think, okay, in this environment, these purplish gray bugs have been doing okay. The mutation pops up. Which one do you guys think is going to survive better, the white bugs or the pink bugs, or the grayish purple bugs? Unfortunately, maybe they live in an area where there's lots of like gravel and little bitty rocks and this like that. And the white bugs stand out against the gravel, which means that they can be picked off by other birds or fish or anything like that that eat them. So the white mutation here is not a beneficial mutation. And so the organisms that have that mutation are not going to be able to survive. Okay, it's not going to help them. They're all going to die off. So right now our population is more of purplish gray bugs and pink bugs. Another couple generations go on, the bugs get to reproduce because they've survived. And now we have another mutation. So we still have our grayish purple bugs, we have our pink bugs, but now we have even darker pink bugs. What's going to happen here? Well, the environment's going to change somehow. Off the top of my head, I can't think how we're going to favor the dark red bugs. But for some reason, the environment changed and our grayish purple bugs that we started off with are no longer best adapted for this environment. Something happened to make it so they could not survive. But our pink and our dark pink bugs are running the place now, okay? They're the most popular kind of bugs that we have. So eventually what we're going to start to see is, even though we started off up here with the purplish gray bugs, we had the mutations that came in with the white bugs. White bugs were not successful. They all died off. The pink bugs that we introduced did prove to be successful, and they went on for a couple generations, and then another mutation showed up in the DNA that again looks like it provided another beneficial mutation. And so eventually we're going to start seeing not white bugs, not purplish gray bugs anymore, but we're going to start seeing pink and dark pink bugs, because those are the ones that are able to survive in this environment. I'll put this up later, okay? So now we got to talk about the dude behind all this, Mr. Charles Darwin. Mr. Charles Darwin was a naturalist back in the 1800s, and a naturalist just means that he loved like everything about science, okay? And he went on about a 5-year ship trip around the world. And a lot of his time was spent down in South America, specifically in the Galapagos Islands, which is where he did a lot of his research. Now, the Galapagos is really important because it is a set of islands that is off the coast of Ecuador, okay, by about a couple hundred miles. And so they're isolated out there in the ocean. We see organisms on the Galapagos Islands that we don't see anywhere else in the world. And so as Darwin was going through his voyage, he kept very good notes and very good detailed journals and things like this. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Darwin because he seems to get it. He knows how the middle school mentality works. And he says, it is not, oh, this is not what I'm thinking. I'm getting ahead of myself. Darwin's idea, sorry, I got excited about Darwin. I'll get there in just a minute. But he says it's not the strongest species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. So we're talking about this idea of survival of the fittest here. And survival of the fittest doesn't mean that if you're the fastest or the strongest or anything like that, you're going to get to survive. Survival of the fittest just means that if you are the best fit for your environment, you're the best adapted, you have the best chance at survival. So on his voyage, Charles Darwin came up with the idea of natural selection after spending about 5 years, like I said, on the HMS Beagle, which was the ship that they went on. And okay, here we go. This is my journal. And in his journal, he says things like, I am very poorly today and very stupid and hate everybody and everything. And I think I need a t-shirt that says that on it for Monday mornings. Okay. So Darwin, through his studies, studied animals like finches. And what he knows about all the finches on the Galapagos is they all look similar, but their beaks were all different. He started noticing iguanas. Marine iguanas are something found in Galapagos that are found nowhere else in the world. And the tortoises. So the tortoises of the Galapagos live to be hundreds of years old. They are extremely well adapted for specific islands. And it's said by the natives in the area that they can tell which island a tortoise came from just by the shape and size of its shell. So for example, if we look at these two turtles right here, tortoises, we have the saddleback tortoise from the Pinta Island, and then we have the dome-shaped tortoises that are from Isabella Island. So if you look at here, we have the Pinta Island saddleback tortoises have a really long neck. They have this shell that kind of comes up and around their neck. Let me get my annotations up here. So their shell comes up and around here. They've got long legs, this long neck. So they're going to be on an island where a lot of their vegetation is going to be kind of higher up. So we've got like vegetation's up here, and our turtle, this is our turtle right here. Okay. They can stand on their legs and they can reach the vegetation. Okay. Now the dome-shaped tortoise of Isabella Island has his shell right here, and it doesn't go up above his neck. So he can't reach his neck up very high. And he's got these short, stubby little legs that he can't get very high up under his shell because the shell is like this huge dome over his body. So this little dude right here, again, here's my awesome drawing of a turtle. Okay. He's going to be eating stuff that is really low to the ground because he can't get up on his legs or his neck to get up to higher stuff. So depending on the vegetation of the island, these tortoises have become extremely well adapted to feeding on those specific vegetations because of their shell shape, because of their legs, because of their necks and everything like that. So we talk about survival of the fittest. If I took this dome-shaped tortoise from Isabella Island and I bumped him over here and he went to go visit his cousins on the Pinta Islands, he's not going to survive very well because he's essentially going to starve because there's not going to be a whole lot of vegetation he can eat because a lot of the vegetation on Pinta Island is up high. So he doesn't have access to a lot of food. All right, so let's clear this off. Okay, so again, tall plants, they have long legs, long necks, short plants, short legs, short necks. So the birds that he saw, these are now called Darwin finches because of all the studies that he did with them. So he looked at all these different birds. He noticed that their beaks were different shapes. So he started thinking, all right, well, what are all these things doing? All these birds are living in the same area, but they're not competing for food. So you have all these birds in the same area, and there's lots of them, but there's not a lot of competition because each one of these different species or subspecies eats a very specific type of food. So for example, number one dude right here, he's got a big, thick beak for crushing through nuts. Number two dude, he's got a little bit thinner beak, but still kind of thick down at the bottom, and he eats seeds. Number three is an insect bird. So he's going to be pecking into little trees or branches or things like that, looking for insects. And then number 4 is one that digs in the moss for insects. So he's got kind of a really thin beak, so he can get into all the nooks and crannies inside the moss to find the insects. So all of these birds would live in the exact same area, but because their beaks are so well adapted for eating specific food, there's not a lot of competition. Oh, yeah, you hear voice. Okay, so these are just some examples of some of the organisms that we see on the Galapagos, nowhere else in the world. We have the marine iguana, Sally Lightfoot crabs that take over entire beaches, sea lions, magnificent frigates, blue-footed booby birds. So another thing that led to Darwin's idea of natural selection is because he was into fossil hunting. He's my kind of dude. And during his expeditions, he collected a lot of fossils over the course of the years. And he started seeing that a lot of the fossils that he saw looked like organisms he was familiar with, that he'd seen before. So this right here is just an example of a fossil. It's a very simple fossil. It's called the trilobite. These are like the cockroaches 500 to about 300 million years ago. So what Darwin thought was that because he's seeing these fossilized organisms that look like organisms that he was familiar with, he thought that this showed that organisms can go extinct. We don't have them anymore, but that existing species could be related to these extinct species. So at one point in his voyage, they were having dinner and he started looking at, okay, I'm gonna get ahead of myself with this one. So this right here, this is an example. Darwin would have found a small piece of this organism shell right here. And if you guys have ever seen Ice Age, you know, you've seen this guy right here. This is an example of something called a glyptodon. A glyptodon was a huge mammal that lived during what was called the Pleistocene era or the Ice Age era. And I want you guys to think for just a second, what kind of animal does this look like that we have today? Well, it looks like a giant stinking armadillo. So the story goes that Darwin was actually eating armadillo for dinner one night with his crewmates, and he started looking at the shell of it and thinking, I have seen this somewhere else before in this fossil that I found. So that got his wheels turning in his head thinking, well, these guys look very, very similar to each other, but the big dudes aren't around anymore. So there's got to be some kind of relationship because there's no reason these two right here should look identical to each other. Granted, the glyptodon is humongous. So this got his wheels turned about how organisms would have changed over time. So for example, this is a glyptodon in scale to a human. Okay. This is another example of some fossils that Darwin found on his trip. These are fossils of something called the Megatherium. Megatherium is also known as the giant ground sloth. That would have stood approximately this tall. So upwards of 12, 13 feet tall. And so Darwin takes all this information, takes all of his fossils, he takes all of his findings, his observations about the tortoises and the finches and all that stuff. And he started to say that, yes, organisms have to change over time. And this was a huge upset to the community that he was living in 1800s England, because everybody said that organisms were created for a specific purpose in a specific shape, and nothing's going to change that. So when Darwin came up with his idea that organisms do change over time, it was this huge scientific upheaval. People were not happy about it. And so in his book on the origin of species, he said that species are going to change over many, many generations. It's not just one or two, it's over thousands and millions of years, a very slow process that they become better adapted to their new conditions. So I'm going to show you guys an example of natural selection in action here. Okay. So my example is that we have this fish right here, and it lays hundreds of eggs. However, there are so many little baby fish that a lot of them are going to be eaten by predators, and they're not going to survive to adulthood. Okay. But a couple of these fish maybe have a mutation, and that mutation for some reason causes the fin on their back fin to be just a little bit curved inward instead of curved outward like this. Now, what is that mutation going to do to the fish? Well, it is going to be able to help that fish swim faster because it's a little bit more aerodynamic. And so that fish has a better chance of getting away from predators. So it's not going to be eaten because it's a really fast swimmer. But all the other fish don't have this mutation and have the rounded outside of their fins, could get eaten. So it just gives them just a little bit of a leg up. And so the curved fin dude gets to survive longer, which means he gets to have more fish babies. And in the generations to come, we're going to start seeing other fish that pop up that have this curved tail. Okay. And if it proves beneficial enough, then eventually we're going to start to see this becoming the dominant phenotype. Remember that word again, the dominant physical appearance of the organisms in that area. So if it works well and these organisms survive longer because they're just a little bit faster and things like that, then we'll start to see all the fish having these curved tails, and the other ones that don't will slowly die out. So this idea of survival of the fittest says that organisms that are most fit for the environment are going to survive and reproduce, and we've hammered that into your head so many times. All right, so one other thing I want to show you guys real quick on this concept of natural selection is something called the peppered moths. So in social studies, I'm pretty sure you guys have talked about the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution is a huge thing that happened back in the 1700s and the 1800s, where factories started using coal to produce a lot of assembly lines and things like that. And so coal was begun to be burned everywhere. And what happens with coal when you burn it, it produces a lot of heavy, thick smoke, and that smoke gets on everything. Okay. So what happened in England during the Industrial Revolution is we have these moths. These are called pepper moths. And let's see, where's one I want. So what's happening is most of the time, the forest was light colored, okay? And so we have these moths that are very, very light. And so they blend in well with the tree right here. Well, the dark moths, actually, no, I don't want to do this. Change of plans, okay? So a little bit about the peppered moth thing right here. So the pepper moths, the original form of them is this light color right here, all right? And they can blend in pretty well with their environment. So if you see in this picture right here, we have a moth in the middle. But during the Industrial Revolution, the smog and the smoke start to come in, and they start to cover the trees in this coating. And it looks something like this right here. And then a mutation pops up in these moths, in these pepper moths, and it makes some of them dark. And what happens is the dark moths are able to camouflage in with the coloration of the trees from the smoke of the Industrial Revolution, which means that now the dark moths stand a better chance against predators because they blend in better. And so now the original white moths get picked off a lot faster because it's easier to see them against the smog and everything like that on the trees. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you what it looks like here through just a little mini game. This is not what I want. So in the original light force, we're going to pretend like these guys right here don't exist yet. Okay. So I'm looking. I'm not seeing a lot of light colored moths on here because they're blending in so well. But I might have to eat just a couple of these black guys, just get some white ones in here. See, there's a white one right there. Okay. Right where my bird head is. And there's one right here. So they blend in really well. Well, the Industrial Revolution is going to come in and it's going to change that. Okay. So remember, our original ones are these light colored moths. Industrial Revolution comes in, and now we have a mutation that has popped up in a few of these moths. And because it makes them dark colored and we have all the soot and everything like that covering the trees, now the original light colored moths stand out. And so it's a lot easier to get picked off by predators if you're a light colored moth. Okay. So this right here is natural selection in action. We're going to start to see a lot more of the dark colored moths surviving rather than the light colored moths. Now, once people start to clear up their practices and they're not burning coal and everything like that again, the smog and the smoke will eventually go away. And then what do you guys think is going to happen to the moth population? Is it going to go back to more light colored models in the population, less dark colored? Is it going to stay about 50-50? Okay, I want you guys to think about what's going to happen with that. So that is our little introduction to natural selection. I will put up, there's a couple of videos in the PowerPoint that I did not put up on here. And then you do have your mastery check to go through and answer your questions on. So once your notes are filled out, go take your mastery check and we'll see how it goes. Good luck.